Hello, everyone. It is Wednesday, February 17th, and Houston is in the middle of a week-long ice storm. Houston Baptist University has been closed down, and since I can't meet my Lord of the Rings class tonight as normal, I am making up this video to go over the main thematic structure of Book 2 of Lord of the Rings. Now, this is meant for my students, but I'm putting it up on my YouTube channel since some of you who love Lord of the Rings might want to follow along with us. If you want to follow along in my class, we use the one-volume edition of the Lord of the Rings, the 50th anniversary one-volume edition, which is excellent, and that's the way Tolkien wanted us to read it, as one book, not as three. And again, I'm not going to get into ins and outs of the plot. I'm going to try to focus on the main themes of Book 2. But before I do that, I want to just kind of say a few words about Book 1 that I talked about in my class that I think are important, because Book 1 is very slow. And a lot of people kind of get bogged down in Book 1 and don't know much what to do with it. Well, I want to go quickly over something I talked about in class, because I think that in Book 1, our hobbits are really being prepared, because most of the dangers that they face in Book 1 are sort of the fears of childhood. And it almost gets us ready for Book 2 when things really start to ratchet up and the Fellowship is put together and sent off on their very dangerous mission. And I want to start by quoting something from Book 1, and it's chapter 3, and it's on page 83. And this is a scene that's actually not in the movie. In the book, Frodo and Sam meet up with a group of elves, and they have shelter with them for a little while, and they talk. And it's really the elves that really tell Sam, "Don't you, abandon Frodo. Frodo needs you." And Sam sort of grows up. But there's one phrase, and almost all the great lines of the book find their way into the movie. But this is one of the ones that didn't find its way into the movie, and so it's a good way to begin. Frodo is talking to the elves, and he's talking about the Shire. And the elf on page 83 says to Frodo, "But it is not your own Shire. Others dwelt here before hobbits were, and others will dwell here again when hobbits are no more. The wide world is all about you. You can fence yourselves in, but you cannot forever fence it out." And in Book 1 of the long Book 1 of the Lord of the Rings, the hobbits are thrown out into the wide world. They have to start growing up. And why do I say the fears of childhood? Well, the first time we meet the Black Riders, they are fearsome, but they're a little bit more like the nightmare a young child might have, what C.S. Lewis liked to call a numinous fear. When they go into the old forest, it's not Fangorn. It doesn't have a cool name yet. It's the old forest and the fears of childhood. Because when you go into a wood, it is dark and thick and it blocks out the sun and you're not sure what's waiting around the bend, right? When you go into a forest, you face your fear, like the Brothers Grimm stories. You look for your doppelganger, your dark other, and you must face that which you most fear and dread. Notice they get help from Farmer Maggot, but at first Frodo's afraid to go to Farmer Maggot because when he was a little hobbit, he stole some mushrooms, and Farmer Maggot threatened to sick his dogs on poor little Frodo and eat him for dinner. And that fear of childhood has remained with Frodo all these years. And later on he says, "Oh, what a regret. I've missed a good friend, Farmer Maggot, because I was so afraid of your dogs." But those fears are important. What about when they meet Tom Bombadil? Well, that's like a sort of a childhood dream, right? Tom Bombadil is such a fantastical character, maybe more than any of the other characters we meet. And yet, at the same place where they meet Tom Bombadil, they're almost killed by the Barrow Wights, which are basically ghosts, and the ghosts almost suck the warmth and life and blood out of them. Again, all of these are very much the fears of childhood. Even meeting Strider, who at first is such a menacing sort of figure. he will turn out to be a friend, but from a child's point of view, he seems very menacing, right? So all of these things, even the Weathertop, the eeriness of it, the Black Riders coming upon them, and Frodo having to run for his life, and finally making his way to Rivendell, and in this wonderful fairy tale ending, the waters come rushing down in the shape of a horse. That's something that Gandalf did, we find out, and floods them, and Frodo is saved. But again, I just want to say that I think all of Book One is a preparation that plays on childhood fears of the boogeyman, fears of the dark, fears of the unknown, fears of leaving your house and moving into the wide world and not knowing what awaits you. But let's turn now to Book Two of The Lord of the Rings and work our way through the chapters. And again, I'm going to try not to get bogged down. There's so much wonderful backstory I'd love to focus on, but I want to kind of stay and focus in on the themes. And so in Book One, the first thing I want to point out is something I missed the first time I read this, maybe the first two times I read it. It's a wonderful little detail that Tolkien doesn't do much with, but I want to point it out to you. It's on the very bottom of page 222. And Gandalf is talking to Frodo, and he's talking about the elves, one of which he just met, Glorfindel. And he's actually played by Arwen in the movie, which I think was a good change. Got to give Arwen something to do. But this is what he says, bottom of 222. Here in Rivendell there live still some of his chief foes, the foes of Sauron, the elven wise, lords of the Eldar from beyond the furthest seas. These are the elves that used to live not only in Beleriand, but even farther in Valinor, the place where the Valar live. And we find out about them. They do not fear the ring-wraiths, for those who have dwelt in the blessed realm live at once in both worlds, and against both the seen and the unseen. They have great power. That's wonderful, because in the Paradiso, Dante is visited by the souls of the blessed who sort of help him as he moves up the levels of heaven, of paradise. But later on we find that, yes, they dwell in the level of the moon or of the sun or of Saturn or of Jupiter, but they also dwell in the mystic rose directly in the presence of God. And so it's almost like an incarnational idea. They're here and there at the same place. And it seems like some of the elves that still remember the elder days sort of live in the blessed land, but they also live like Galadriel, but they also live in Middle Earth. So it adds a sort of mystical elf edge. And we'll talk more about elves as we go through this. Okay, as we move through many meetings, on page 226 and 227, we finally get to meet many of the elves, and we get to see Gandalf. And what we do is we see them for a moment unveiled, because often the elves, and especially Gandalf, very rarely show the fullness of their power and light. And we sort of catch a glimpse of it. And just like in Aslan's country, if you know Narnia, the people that are in heaven, Aslan's country, are of no particular age, young and old at the same time. That's how the elves and even Gandalf is described when we first meet them in this wonderful, wonderful passage where we're starting to see, again, the power, the glory of the elves that is so deep. Well, finally, in many meetings, this is where Bilbo Baggins gives Frodo not only Sting, which he'll use, but also gives him that chainmail of mithril, the pure silver that will save his life many times. But there's a wonderful moment here on page 232 that's done really well in the movie. And it says, Bilbo says, "Oh, I'd like to see the ring." And as Frodo undresses, the ring is exposed. And it says, when he undressed, Frodo found that while he slept, the ring had been hung about his neck on a new chain, light but strong. Slowly he drew it out. Bilbo put it in his hand, but Frodo quickly drew back the ring. To his distress and amazement, he found that he was no longer looking at Bilbo. A shadow seemed to have fallen between them, and through it he found himself eyeing a little wrinkled creature with a hungry face and bony, groping hands. He felt a desire to strike him. Right? So, for a moment, the lust and the hunger and the unholy desire that is drawn out of people by the ring. We see it in Bilbo's face, and it's a terror to Frodo because this could become him as well. And we'll talk more about the ring in a moment. Also in chapter 1, Many Meanings, we get to hear a long, beautiful song starting on page 233 about Eärendil. And you should know that this is the first poem that Tolkien wrote. I mean, he changed it over the years, but the very beginning of his Middle-earth stories that really became the Silmarillion were about Eärendil and his starship that sails through the night bearing the light of the Silmaril, the last remaining Silmaril. The others have been thrown into the ocean, into the earth, and are lost. And as we listen to the story, this beautiful poem, it says, 233, at first the beauty of the melodies and of the interwoven words in elven tongues, even though he, Frodo, understood them little, held him in a spell as soon as he began to attend them. Almost it seemed that the words took shape, and visions of far lands and bright things that he had never yet imagined opened out before him, and the firelit hall became like a golden mist above seas of foam that sighed upon the margins of the world. Then the enchantment became more and more dreamlike, until he felt that an endless river of swelling gold and silver was flowing over him, too multitudinous for its pattern to be comprehended. It became part of the throbbing air about him, and it drenched and drowned him. Swiftly he sank under its shining weight into a deep realm of sleep. There he wandered long in a dream of music that turned into running water. And then we hear that very long, it goes on for about 3 or 4 pages, Lay of Eärendil, Song of Eärendil. And we're starting to capture something that I'll talk about more today as well, and that's the magic of the elves, a sort of sympathetic magic that flows over you, a magic that sort of takes you outside of time. I don't know any author that does as well a job as Tolkien does at enchanting us and drawing us into the enchantment of fairy, a place that is perilous, but also has a great, great beauty that goes or transcends our simple world of time and space. And we're going to see more of that enchantment in a moment, especially when we get to Lothlorien. Okay, chapter 2, The Council of Elrond, is the single longest chapter in the whole book of The Lord of the Rings. And it's sort of a test whether or not you're going to like this kind of epic fantasy or not. Because it's very long and very involved, and in it, everybody comes together and tells their story. Whether it's Frodo or Gandalf or Boromir or Aragorn, they're all telling their story, and the pieces are being assembled. And any true epic fantasy worth its salt has to have stuff like this, where we find out how all the clues come together to tell a meaningful story. And it's really ironic, folks, because a lot of epic fantasy writers today are atheists, right? And if you're atheist, you don't believe in God, and you can't possibly believe that there's a higher purpose. All there is stuff. And yet, even those people who have no belief in a meaningful world run by a meaningful God, if you're going to write an epic fantasy or an epic movie like the Star Wars saga, you have to have things like prophecies and riddles that are brought together. Because what you're finding out, whether you believe it or not, epic fantasy is in a world where time is meaningful and it's going somewhere. There's purpose. And we need eyes to see and ears to hear if we're going to read the signs. Sorry, I'm all dressed up because it's really cold. I've got electricity, but I'm keeping it as cold as I can because electricity is dying here in Houston. So that's why I'm dressed like a little bit like a hobo here. I got lots of layers, and I'm hoping that I will be warmed up as you are warmed up as we go through the beauty of not only the Lord of the Rings, but of this amazing passage, right? And we start to heal all the backstory. And there's a moment where Elrond is talking about the war that defeated Sauron at the end of the Second Age, which is over 3,000 years ago. And Frodo's like, what do you mean you remember this? This happened ages ago. And we realize that Elrond has been around through all three ages. He was at the first age, at the end of which Morgoth was defeated. He was at the end of the second age, at which Sauron was temporarily defeated. And he's here now at the end of the third age. And we need to understand the great, great age, the layering of age that makes Lord of the Rings so powerful. And yet, like the Bible, which is equally layered over thousands of years, all of it is leading somewhere towards a purposeful end. That doesn't mean everybody's going to be happy and joyous. There will be death and there will be pain and there will be sorrow, but it is all leading to a meaningful end. Let's just look at a few passages. There's so many. Boromir appears, and on page 246, we find out that a dream came to his brother Faramir several times, and it actually came once to Boromir. And although Faramir should have gone on this journey, Boromir, the stronger, elder one, takes it upon him. And we see the wonderful poem on page 246, "Seek for the sword that was broken, in Imladris it dwells. There shall be counsels taken, stronger than Morgul spells. There shall be shown a token that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane shall waken, and the halfling forth shall stand." And we put together bits and pieces, knowing that Imladris is another name for Rivendell, knowing that the token, Isildur's bane, is the ring that led to the destruction of Isildur, who refused to throw it away at Mount Doom when he had the chance, right? And of course, the halfling will ultimately be Frodo. Bit by bit, we put it together. Then on page 247, we hear once again the famous rhyme about Aragorn that begins, "All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost." And we find out for the first time that Bilbo made up this wonderful poem. And if you've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we hear, "Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight." And we put it together with, "When Adam's flesh and Adam's bone sits at Cair Paravel enthroned, the evil times will be over and done." And we watch how the different prophecies come together. The hopes and fears of all the years are met at the Council of Elrond in Book 2, Chapter 2 of The Lord of the Rings. Everything comes together. Everything is meaningful, and it points to good, but again, there will be suffering along the way. Let's turn to page 248. We find out something very important that Aragorn tells us, and I think we need to remember this in our own day and age, okay? Tolkien was not a hawk, was not a warmonger. He wasn't a pacifist, although in a way Frodo becomes a pacifist at the end of this book. But he's not, a die-hard pacifist. He believes that there are certain wars that need to be fought. He doesn't love war, but he respects soldiers, the military, the rangers who protect us. He doesn't turn around and blame the soldiers for the fact that there is strife in the world when they're the ones who are trying to protect us from it. But anyway, this wonderful passage, it's on page 248, and he says, "And yet less thanks have we than you." And he's talking about the rangers, those in the north who have been protecting the Shire and Bree from all these terrible things. He says, "Travelers scowl at us, and countrymen give us scornful names. Strider I am to one fat man who lives within a day's march of foes that would freeze his heart or lay his little town in ruins if we were not guarded, he were not guarded ceaselessly." That fat man, of course, is Barleyman Butterbur, the owner of the prancing pony in Bree. "Yet we would not have it otherwise," Aragorn says. "If simple folk are free from care and fear, simple they will be, and we must be secret to keep them so. That has been the task of my kindred, while the years have lengthened and the grass has grown." Please, in a horrible year where the police were blamed for every ill of our society, remember this, okay? There are those who protect us, and sometimes we're only allowed to complain because we are protected from great dangers. And so again, Tolkien was by no means a hawk, but he understood and respected those who protect us and allow us to remain even a little bit naive because we don't know the dangers that are out there. Wow. Let's move on. Again, there's so much backstory. Turn to page 253, and we see at the top of 253 a sort of, what do we call it? The diary of Isildur, who refused to destroy the ring. It was ended up being destroyed by. But it's interesting here. He talks about how when the ring is hot, he can see the writing inside of it. But I want you to see the end of his little diary entry here that Gandalf discovers. He says, "But for my part, I will risk no hurt to this thing," the ring, "of all the works of Sauron, the only fair. It is precious to me, though I buy it with great pain." One of the ongoing themes in The Lord of the Rings is characters who seek after forbidden things, whether it's the forbidden wisdom that Saruman seeks, the forbidden wisdom that even Gollum seeks under the mountain, or the forbidden power that is offered by the ring. When we seek after that which is forbidden, it causes us pain. It cuts us off from the world around us and makes us lonely and isolated. And we see this. This is what happens. This is the story of Saruman. It is Sauron. It is the Black Riders. It is Gollum. In a sense, it's Wormtongue. These are people who have sought after that which is forbidden. And they may have gained some power and knowledge, but they regret it. It cuts them off and isolates them. Wow. Okay, let's move forward. I'm going to look at some other things that are important here. Turn to page 258. 258. This is, and by the way, the movie very wisely, allows us to see what's happening to Gandalf simultaneous with Frodo and everybody. But here, this is sort of old-fashioned storytelling. It's not until Book 2, Chapter 2, that we actually find out what Gandalf has been doing and why he's left the poor hobbits and Aragorn all alone. And so, the first time you read this book, you're really, really waiting. And we have a scene where he goes to meet Saruman, not yet knowing that Saruman has gone to the dark side. Now, this scene, of course, is done very, very well in the movie. We have a wonderful, fight between the wizards, between Saruman and Gandalf. But here's another case, one of the few cases where the movie leaves out one of the most important lines in the book. Again, 90% of the good lines are there in the book, in the movie, which is wonderful. But here's one that's very important for understanding the thematic structure. Okay, at this point, Gandalf still calls Saruman the White. He is the leader of the Order, the leader of the White Council. Gandalf is Gandalf the Grey at this point, right? And he calls him Saruman the White, and he is told wrong. Okay, at the very bottom of 258, top of 259, he says, "For I am Saruman the Wise, Saruman Ringmaker, Saruman of many colors." And Gandalf says, "I looked then and saw that his robes, which had seemed white, were not so, but were woven of all colors, and if he moved, they shimmered and changed hue, so that the eye was bewildered." And then Gandalf says, "I liked white better." To which Saruman says, "White, it serves as a beginning. The white cloth may be dyed. The white page can be overwritten. The white light can be broken. In which case," Gandalf replies, "it is no longer white. And he that breaks a thing to find out what it is has left the path of wisdom." Perhaps Tolkien has in mind a line by William Wordsworth in a poem he wrote called, The Tables Turned. "Sweet is the lore which nature brings. Our meddling intellect misshapes the beauteous forms of things we murder to dissect." The magic of Saruman is a technological magic. It is a magic that breaks things. It doesn't draw together. It doesn't work in sympathy with nature, but it works over nature, breaking things, vivisecting them, dissecting them to get their secret. Unfortunately, when you do that, you end up destroying them often, like putting like dissecting a frog. You now understand it, but you've also killed the frog. And so the technological magic of Saruman and also Sauron is very different from the sympathetic magic of the elves that we're going to see again a little bit later in Lothlorien. But here I want you to see that the evil magic breaks apart. It severs the connection between man and nature rather than working in sympathy with it. And Saruman tries to convince Gandalf to join him. And he says on 259, "Listen, Gandalf, my old friend and helper. I said we, for we it may be, if you will join with me. A new power is rising." Of course, he means Sauron, the return of Sauron. "Against it, the old allies and policies will not avail us at all. There is no hope left in elves or dying Numenor." That's the people of Gondor and the Rangers, the final people of Westerness of Numenor. "This then is one choice before you, before us. We may join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it. As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow. And the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its course, to control it. We can bide our time. We can keep our thoughts in our hearts, deploring maybe evils done by the way, but approving the high and ultimate purpose, knowledge, rule, order. All the things that we have so far striven in vain to accomplish, hindered rather than helped by our weak or idle friends. There would not be any real change in our designs, only in our means. Saruman, I have heard speeches of this kind before, but only in the mouths of emissaries sent from Mordor to deceive the ignorant. I cannot think that you brought me so far only to weary my ears." All right, Saruman believes in Machiavellianism, we call it today. The ends justify the means, expediency. Whatever needs to be done, I'm going to do it for a greater end. You see, the wizards, the Istari, the most important of which are Gandalf and Saruman, though we meet Radagast the Brown just briefly, right, more in the movie of The Hobbit. They were sent, ultimately by Iluvatar, Eru, God, sent to Middle-earth to help and advise. That's what they were supposed to do. But Saruman wants to rule. And he says, we were sent here for a task, and we're not doing a good job. We need the ring, and then we'll have the power to bring real order. Now, in Shadow of the Past, Book 1, Chapter 2, Gandalf, when Frodo offers the ring to Gandalf, he says, "No, don't give it to me. I would use it for pity and would be an even worse tyrant than Sauron." Well, Gandalf would use it for pity. Saruman would use it for order and knowledge and all of that sort of stuff. But either one of them will be corrupted by it. As we'll hear in a moment, the ring is altogether evil and cannot be used. Right? It's summed up nicely in the movie when he says, there is only one Lord of the Ring, and he does not share power. So don't talk to me about we, Saruman. Only one person can wield the ring at any one given time. So watch out. Again, the ring will corrupt you. Let's move on a little farther. We're still in this super long chapter 2. And we find out that again, Saruman went to the dark side because, again, he sought forbidden wisdom. It is perilous to study too deeply the lore of the enemy, is basically what Gandalf says. Beware. Okay, now let's jump to 267. And Boromir has listened to all of this, and Boromir says, about the middle of 267, I do not understand all of this, Boromir says. Saruman is a traitor, yes, but did he not have a glimpse of wisdom? Why do you speak ever of hiding and destroying? Why should we not think that the great ring has come into our hands to serve in the very hour of need? Wielding it, the free lords of the free may surely defeat the enemy. That is what he most fears, I deem. The men of Gondor are valiant, and they will never submit, but they may be beaten down. Valor needs first strength and then a weapon. Let the ring be your weapon. If it has such power as you say, take it and go forth to victory. So we already see that Boromir is tempted in a way that the other members of the fellowship are not. That's about to be formed. And look at the response. Alas, no, said Elrod, who is the head of the council. We cannot use the ruling ring. That we now know too well. It belongs to Sauron and was made by him alone and is altogether evil. This is the weapon you must not use. Its strength, Boromir, is too great for anyone to wield at will, save only those who have already a great power of their own. But for them, it holds an even deadlier peril. The very desire of it corrupts the heart. Right? If you're weak, it will destroy you. But if you're strong, it will corrupt you. Consider Saruman. If any of the wise should with this ring overthrow the Lord of Mordor using his own arts, he would then would set himself on Sauron's throne, and yet another dark lord would appear. And that is another reason why the ring should be destroyed. As long as it is in the world, it will be a danger even to the wise. Now listen. For nothing is evil in the beginning. Even Sauron was not so. I fear to take the ring to hide it. I will not take the ring to wield it. This is absolutely essential to Narnia, to Lord of the Rings, and interestingly essential to the Harry Potter books, which, whatever the author believes, is completely Judeo-Christian in its understanding of good and evil. The proper Christian Augustinian understanding of evil is that evil is a perversion or corruption of good. Fancy word, it's a privation of good. It's a lack, right? Everything. Even the evil Morgoth was good in the beginning, but he went bad. Sauron was good, but went bad. Saruman, Gollum, the Black Riders, all of them were good in the beginning because they were created good, but they were corrupted by the ring. We even find out that orcs are corrupted elves, just like trolls are corrupted ents, right? Anything can be corrupted. Gollum was once not that different from Bilbo or Frodo. We need to remember this essential understanding of evil. Okay, turn to page 269, getting to the end of this long chapter, and some very important themes sort of come together here. All right, he says here, again, 269, thus we return once more to the destroying of the ring, said Arester, and yet we come no nearer. What strength have we for the finding of the fire in which, how can we get to Mount Doom and throw it into the cracks of doom? Listen to what Gandalf says. Despair or folly? It is not despair. For despair is only for those who see the end beyond all doubt. We do not. Isn't that weird? You would think that if you knew the ending, you would not despair. But no, it is not for us to know the future. Right? This is, God is very upset by fortune tellers. Dante puts the fortune tellers pretty deep down in hell because it is wrong for us to look forward in an unlawful way. Seeing is perilous is one of the themes of the Lord of the Rings. And oddly enough, when we know too much, it causes us despair. We'll find out later in this book that Denethor, right, the steward of Gondor, has a palantir that he sees. And what happens is Sauron shows him what he wants him to see. Everything he sees is true, but he only sees, and it is his seeing of the future that causes him to give into total despair. Saruman, too, in a way, despairs at least of elves and men because he's looked in his palantir, and his decision is not suicide, but it is, I will become a new Dark Lord, and I'll do it right this time, right? As one tyrant says as he throws out the old tyrant and takes up the new. Well, I'll do it right this time. So again, we don't want to know the end, and that's why we don't despair. Odd. We do not. It is wisdom to recognize necessity when all the courses have been weighed, though as folly it may appear to those who cling to false hope. Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy. For he, Sauron, is very wise, and he weighs all things to a nicety in the scales of his malice. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power. and so he judges all hearts. Into his heart the thought will not enter that any will refuse it, that having the ring we may seek to destroy it. If we seek this, we shall put him out of reckoning. This is in the movie, but I don't think they make it clear enough in the movie. Why does this ploy work? Why are Frodo and Sam able to walk into Mordor and destroy the ring? The reason is that Sauron, because he is evil and has given way to the dark side, simply cannot conceive that anyone having the ring would not use it for his own power, because evil is ultimately blind. Goodness understands good and understands evil. Evil does not understand good and does not even understand its own evil. As it says in John chapter 1, the light shined, in him was life, and the word, Christ, Logos, in him was life, and that life is the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now the Greek word there, katalambano, means to grasp. But you can grasp something with your hands, in other words, overcome or defeat it, or you can grasp it with your mind, understand or comprehend it. So there's two ways to translate John 1:5. Either the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it, or the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not comprehended or understood it. I think the surface meaning is it hasn't overcome it, but I think the deeper meaning captured in that beautiful Greek word is evil cannot only not defeat good in the long run, it cannot even understand good. Evil is ultimately blind. It is myopic, like the one eye of Sauron that lacks sort of dual vision and dual perspective, right? So again, they're able to do it because Sauron just cannot conceive that anybody would deceive the ring, because evil is ultimately blind. At least for a while, said Elrod. The road must be trod, but it will be very hard, and neither strength nor wisdom will carry us far upon it. This quest may be attempted by the weak, with as much hope as the strong. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do them, because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere. Isn't that wonderful? The fate of so much rests on Frodo, on the smallest of the small. And yet that is the way that the world works, that God in Genesis chooses the younger son. He chooses David, the youngest, the ruddy one. He chooses Israel itself, maybe the weakest and smallest of the nations. And yet through that, he works. Well, there's a wonderful moment when Bilbo, whose age has caught up with him, stands up and says, well, I thought my journey was done, but give me the ring. I'll take it to Mordor. And Boromir is about to laugh when he looks around and sees everybody serious, with how much reverence they hold the beloved Bilbo. And then Gandalf says, page 340 now. I'm sorry, 269. Very bottom of 269. Of course, my dear Bilbo, said Gandalf, if you had really started this affair, you might be expected to finish it. But you know well enough now that starting is too great a claim for any, and that only a small part is played in great deeds by any hero. Oh, you need not bow. Though the word was meant, and we do not doubt that under jest you are making a valiant offer, but one beyond your strength, Bilbo. You cannot take this thing back. It has passed on. If you need my advice any longer, I should say that your part is ended, unless as a recorder. Finish your book and leave the ending unaltered. There is still hope for it, but get ready to write a sequel when they come back. It's moved on. We each play our part, and it moves on. And Bilbo played a part, and Frodo will play a part, and we play a part in this. I said to my students that the real work that God is doing in human history specifically begins with Abraham. And Abraham is only 4,000 years ago. So this narrative that the Bible's telling, of course it begins with the fall and Cain and Abel, the flood, Babel, but the real deep historical work is only 4,000 years old. So if you live to 80, you will make up 2% of that lifespan. Will we play our role, even if we're the smallest of the small? Well, farther down the page, they're trying to figure out what to do, and it says, Frodo glanced at all the faces, but they were not turned to him. All the council sat with downcast eyes as if in deep thought. A great dread fell on him, as if he was awaiting the pronouncement of some doom that he had long foreseen, and vainly hoped might after all never be spoken. An overwhelming longing to rest and remain at peace by Bilbo's side in Rivendell filled all of his heart. At last, with an effort, he spoke, and wondered to hear his own words, as if some other will was using his small voice. "I will take the ring, though I do not know the way." How similar is this to "Behold the handmaiden of the Lord, let it be done even as thou sayest." That's what Mary says to the Archangel Gabriel when he brings the news, the Annunciation, that she will conceive a virgin birth and give birth to the Messiah. Frodo is a ring bearer. He's a Christ figure, but here he's also a Mary figure who is willing on to take it, though he cannot possibly understand the fullness of danger of what it means. Wow. And then, of course, Sam pops up, and Elrond says, "No, you cannot be separated from your master, even when he is called to a secret council and you have not." Notice the very long Book 1, Chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past, ends with Sam eavesdropping and becoming part of it. The same thing, Book 2, Chapter 2, very long, ends with Sam eavesdropping. So there's a wonderful architecture to this. Well, they put together the Fellowship, and they decide that it will be represented by the men, the elves, the dwarves, the hobbits. They're all there, and at first, Elrond doesn't want to allow Merry and Pippin to go. He wants to send them back to the Shire, but Gandalf says, "I think, Elrond, we should trust to their friendship more than anything." By the way, in case you missed it, why did they choose 9 walkers for the Fellowship? They're meant to stand over against the 9 Black Riders, the Nazgul, the Ringwraiths. They are the ones who will stand up and be the force of good against the force of evil. And so they go off, and I'm sorry, I misspoke last time. It's actually right now that Bilbo gives Frodo Sting and the chainmail, the mithril coat. I'm sorry, it's right now. Anyway, on they go, and as they're about to leave, Elrond commissions them. This is the very bottom of page 280. "This is my last word. The ring bearer is setting out on the quest of Mount Doom," we're in chapter 3 now. "On him alone is any charge laid, neither to cast away the ring, nor to deliver it to any servant of the enemy, nor indeed to let any handle it, save members of the company and the council, and only then in gravest need. The others go with him as free companions. They're not puppets like the Black Riders are to Sauron. They are all free. Frodo isn't in a way because he's chosen to be the ring bearer. You will help him. You may tarry or come back or turn aside. The further you go, the less easy will it be to withdraw, yet no oath or bond is laid on you to go further than you will. For you do not yet know the strength of your hearts, and you cannot foresee what each may meet upon the road." And then Gimli and Elrond trade proverbs in a wonderful way. Gimli, "Faithless is he that says farewell when the road darkens. Let him not vow to walk in the dark who has not seen the nightfall. Yet sworn word may strengthen quaking cart, or break it. Look not too far ahead." And that's part of the problem. Don't, just one day at a time, okay? Take your vow, but don't be overly hasty in your vow. And so the ring goes south, as is the name of the chapter, and they move down bit by bit. Not as many things to point out here. I'll just point out a few. Notice, by the way, that Gandalf cannot turn snow into fire. Okay? Gandalf's magic, like the elves, works in sympathy with nature. If you give me a piece of wood, he can use his magic to set the fire on wood, but he can't make snow burn. Okay? His magic is not an invasion of nature, but a sort of furthering of it, drawing out of its deep magic. So and those of you that are into that, what is that show called? Avatar, the earthbenders, and they can't just bend anything. They need earth or water or fire, and then they can do something with it, but they can't conjure it out of nothing. Okay, as we move into the next chapter, A Journey in the Dark, Okay. Again, I'm gonna skip because there's fun stuff here, but not the stuff that I want to focus on in terms of deep themes. Okay, so we're gonna move in there, and as we move deeper into there, you know what? I'm gonna just go all the way to page 315. This is the end of the chapter. We have this beautiful poem that Gimli speaks about Khazad-dûm, Moria. And it begins, "The world was young, the mountains green, no stain yet on the moon was seen. No words were laid on stream or stone when Durin woke and walked alone. He named the nameless hills and dells, he drank from yet untasted wells. He stooped and looked in Mirror and saw a crown of stars appear as gems upon a silver thread above the shadow of his head." He's beautiful. And again, the dominant mood of the Lord of the Rings is elegiac. There's always something lost, a deep nostalgia. Remember, nostalgia is a Greek word that means homecoming pain. That's why it's a bitter, sweet emotion. And we see this, and we are told about the dwarves that dug too deep and woke the sleeping monster, what will be the Balrog. And he ends his poem by saying, "The world is gray, the mountains old, the forge is fire, is ashen cold, no harp is rung, no hammer falls, the darkness dwells in Durin's halls. The shadow lies upon his doom in Moria, in Khazad-dûm. But still the sunken stars appear in dark and windless Mirror. There lies his crown in water deep, till Durin wakes again from sleep." Do you know what great leader is not dead, but only sleeps, awaiting for when we need him? Of course, it's King Arthur, who is asleep on the island of Avalon. And when the world needs him, he will return, and he will take up Excalibur, even as Aragorn will take up the shards of Narsil that will become Andúril, the flame of the west. So there is a messianic hope, and Aragorn proves to be the messianic king, waiting. Then we go on to learn, I won't read it, but again, in their greed, the dwarves dug too deep for the mithril, the true silver, and by digging too deep, they woke up Durin's bane. Now, Durin's bane and Isildur's bane, you might be wondering what kind of a figure of speech that is. It's not exactly a simile or a metaphor or an allegory or a symbol. It's something that doesn't appear very often in Greek and Roman mythology, but is very prevalent in the sagas and myths of the Norsemen. We call it a kenning, Kenning. A kenning, it's a kind of, it's figurative language, but an example is Whale's Road. Well, what is the Whale Road? That's a way of describing the sea. Or Freya's hair. That's one of the goddesses of Norse mythology, and it's a way of saying gold. Freya's golden hair. But it's a beautiful indirect way of saying it that shows how often language carries an entire story with it. Durin's bane is the Balrog, just as Isildur's bane is the ring that led to their destruction. But again, you dig too greedily, you break into the earth, you seek forbidden wisdom, forbidden power, and it brings destruction. Okay, let's move into the next chapter, chapter 5, the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. Okay, again, maybe we'll just jump right to the end. The wonderful scene that's done so well in the movie, page 330, standing there on the bridge, holding his staff and sword, and Gandalf says, "You cannot pass. I am a servant of the secret fire, wielder of the flame of Anor. You cannot pass. The dark fire will not avail you, flame of Udun. Go back to the shadow. You cannot pass." The secret fire is the fire that Ilúvatar, God, the creator, put in Middle-earth. And it was the secret fire that is the Holy Spirit. And there's even a few things in the letters that suggest that Tolkien would probably agree. It's ultimately the Holy Spirit. It is the secret fire that Morgoth, Melkor, lusted after. In some ways, Sauron lusts after. The Balrog is an evil, twisted, perverse version of the secret fire. And notice he's both darkness and shadow. As Milton says of hell in Paradise Lost, it is darkness visible, which of course is an oxymoron, but the Balrog is both shadow and flame. Down goes Gandalf, his last words, "Fly, you fools." Always that beloved. And so off they fly, and they come to Lothlorien. And we come to meet the elves. And I'm sorry, I must keep moving forward, skipping so many beautiful poems and whatnot. But as we come, we have this wonderful moment where they are going to allow Gimli to move deeper into Lothlorien, but he must agree to being blindfolded. And he refuses. "You think I'm a traitor?" And in a wonderful moment of friendship and charity, Aragorn says, "Okay, look, we'll all be blindfolded so that our poor friend Gimli does not have to be singled out." That is the power of the friendship and camaraderie that gives them the strength to go on and on as they move deeper and deeper. Now turn to page 349, and another one of the most beautiful paragraphs in the novel. So often, Tolkien tries to explain the magic and beauty and wonder of the elves of Rivendell and Lothlorien. And here's the way it's described in 349. He is Frodo. "As soon as Frodo set foot upon the far bank of Silverlode, a strange feeling had come upon him, and it deepened as he walked on into the Naith. It seemed to him that he had stepped over a bridge of time into a corner of the elder days, and was now walking in a world that was no more. In Rivendell there was memory of ancient things. In Lorien the ancient things still lived on in the waking world. Evil had been seen and heard there. Sorrow had been known. The elves feared and distrusted the world outside. Wolves were howling on the wood's borders. But on the land of Lorien, no shadow lay." We might call this Shangri-La. We might call it El Dorado, right? It is that secret land, that land that is still untouched, that is still pure. And again, only Tolkien can capture the beauty of it. He tries to say it again. On the next page, on page 351, we find out that it's like living inside a song, is how it's described, right? It says, "Frodo felt that he was in a timeless land that did not fade or change or fall into forgetfulness. When he had gone and passed again into the outer world, still Frodo, the wanderer from the Shire, would walk there upon the grass among Elenor and Nifredil in fair Lothlorien." It is a glimpse of heaven that stays with him forever. And as he breathes the magic air of the elves, look what it says. This is just so almost eerie. A couple paragraphs. "Haldir had gone on and was now climbing to the high flet. As Frodo prepared to follow him, he laid his hand upon the tree beside the ladder. Never before had he been so suddenly and so keenly aware of the feel and texture of a tree's skin and of the life within it. He felt a delight in wood and the touch of it, neither as forester nor as carpenter. It was the delight of the living tree itself." There's elf magic that only Tolkien, so much deeper than most of the magic in Harry Potter or most other things. It's like he's one with the tree. It was said of Tolkien, he got inside language. Well, for a moment, Frodo gets inside the living tree itself and somehow shares in its beating life. Wow. All right, let's meet more of the elves. Let's turn to the next chapter. And on page 354, we meet the Lord and Lady of Lothlorien, Galadriel, and her husband Celeborn, whom she met way back in Beleriand, in the place where the girdle of Melian protected that wonderful area of Doriath. And there they are, of no specific age, like the people in Aslan's country. and there they call them one by one. But I want you to notice the unbelievable courtesy and the relationship of these two, because it's very clear that Galadriel really outclasses Celeborn, and she shows herself to be much better. But read carefully this passage and the way she respects her husband and defers to him. It's just a beautiful moment. And yet we see her strength, right? Because whereas Celeborn wants to doubt the dwarves, I want you to see this beautiful moment. It's on page 356. And look at how courteously Galadriel greets the dwarf who has been the enemy for so long. And she says this: "Dark is the water of Heled Zaran, and cold are the springs of Kibel Nala, and fair were the many-pillared halls of Khazad-dûm in elder days, before the fall of mighty kings beneath the stone." She looked upon Gimli, who sat glowering and sad, and she smiled. And the dwarf, hearing the names given in his own ancient tongue, looked up and met her eyes, and it seemed to him that he looked suddenly into the heart of an enemy and saw there love and understanding. Wonder came into his face, and then he smiled in answer. He rose clumsily and bowed in dwarf fashion, saying, "Yet more fair is the living land of Lorien, and the Lady Galadriel is above all the jewels that lie beneath the earth." I like to think of a rough, crusty old Catholic sailor who is sort of domesticated by love for the Virgin Mary, because Galadriel very much is the Virgin Mary and exudes some of her power and courtesy. But when she smiles on the dwarf, she is Beatrice. This is the wonderful moment in the Divine Comedy when Beatrice smiles on Dante. That is who she is, this lovely lady of courtesy. And she moves Gimli not just because of her courtesy, but because she speaks the name of the places he loves in his own tongue. Right? It would be like an American talking to someone from another country and trying to use the name of their country and a few other words as a way, not just of showing respect, but a kind of love and an appreciation of the beauty of these words. It is wonderful, right? The very bottom of the page, "Your quest is known to us," said Galadriel to Frodo, "but we will not here speak of it more openly. Yet not in vain will it prove, maybe, that you came to this land seeking aid, as Gandalf himself plainly purposed. For the Lord of the Galadrim is accounted the wisest of the elves," that's her husband, Celeborn, "of Middle-earth, and a giver of gifts beyond the power of kings. He has dwelt in the west since the days of dawn, and I have dwelt with him years uncounted, for ere the fall of Nargothrond or Gondolin." See, again, really, Celeborn did not do a very good job talking to the dwarf. But again, the respect she shows is really beautiful. Then she says that it was she who called the White Council, the ones that chased Sauron out of Dol Guldur and sent him back to Mordor. But she says, if they had listened to me, I would have made Gandalf the Grey the leader of the council. But instead, Saruman became the leader. And then she said so well in the movie, "But this I will say to you, your quest stands upon the edge of a knife. Stray but a little, and it will fail to the ruin of all. Yet hope remains while all the company is true." And then one by one, Galadriel tests them, like she looks into their soul. Poor Sam feels like he was naked. And she tests them to see if they have the resolve. Will they stay true to this? And most of them deal with it. But notice the one that is most on edge, on page 358, is Boromir. He says, "To me it seemed exceedingly strange. Maybe it was only a test, and she thought to read our thoughts for her own good purpose. But almost I should have said that she was tempting us, and offering what she pretended to have the power to give. It need not be said that I refused to listen. The men of Minas Tirith are true to their word." But what he thought that the lady had offered him, Boromir did not tell. Frodo says, she held you long in her gaze, ring-bearer. And then Frodo says, but whatever came into my mind, I will keep there. Well, have a care, said Boromir. I do not feel too sure about this elvish lady and her purposes. Speak no evil of the Lady Galadriel, said Aragorn sternly. You know not what you say. There is in her and in this land no evil, unless a man bring it hither himself. There is no evil in Lothlorien, but we may bring it with us. Now, notice that everybody else is tested by Galadriel, but Boromir feels as if he's been tempted. Okay? We're already seeing foreshadowing that Boromir will be the one that betrays the Fellowship and tries to steal the ring from Galadriel. We keep moving. We get some wonderful tributes to Gandalf. I'm sorry, but I'm skipping many of these things as we move on. And let's go down to page 362, where we will encounter the Mirror of Galadriel. Okay. As they see there, and it's kind of really neat because they're wondering where Galadriel is, and Sam's like, I wish I could see some of her magic. And then Galadriel appears as if she read their thoughts. And she says, many things I can command the mirror to reveal, she answered, and to some I can show what they desire to see. But the mirror will also show things unbidden, and those are often stranger and more profitable than things which we wish to behold. What you will see if you leave the mirror free to work, I cannot tell, for it shows things that were, and things that are, and things that yet may be. But which it is that he sees, even the wisest cannot always tell. Do you wish to look? Frodo did not answer. And you, she said, turning to Sam, for this is what your folk would call magic, I believe, though I do not understand clearly what they mean, and they seem to use the same word of the deceits of the enemy. But this, if you will, is the magic of Galadriel. Did you not say that you wished to see elf magic? I did. I'll have a peep, lady, if you're willing. Notice, don't use the same. We use the same word magic for Saruman and Sauron that we do for Galadriel and the elves and Gandalf. It's totally different. We may use the same word, but again, it's the difference between that technological magic and this sympathetic magic. She is in sympathy, and the water is in sympathy with the looker and allows them to see things. And when Sam looks in, he actually sees the coming, what will be called the scouring of the Shire. And we find out that the mirror is dangerous because, again, seeing is perilous. A major theme in the whole Lord of the Rings. Be careful what you look at. Right? And Frodo finally looks, and he sees the eye watching him. And he comes out, and then basically, because, he sees it, and the enemy comes close, and then on page 365, Galadriel does something really weird. It says, she lifted up her white arms and spread out her hands towards the east, that's where Mordor is, in a gesture of rejection and denial. Eärendil, the evening star, most beloved of the elves, shone clear above. Okay, now, I grew up Greek Orthodox, and when a baby's baptized, the godparents take the baptismal vows for the baby. And what they're told to do is turn to the back of the church, away from the altar, and they say, do you reject the devil and all his wiles? And they say, I reject. Just breathe and spit on it. So you're supposed to go like that, rejecting the devil. I think Catholicism has similar things. I mean, she's literally turning Mordor, and she is rejecting the evil of the Dark One, the devil. Now, Sauron's not exactly. The guy, Morgoth is more like the devil. Sauron is more like an underling. And Saruman is yet another underling as we go down. But there is a rejection of the dark. And then suddenly, the light of Eärendil, that's the light of the star. The star of Eärendil is the Silmaril. And in case you wonder where she gets the star glass, we'll see that in a second, when it shone down, when the light of Eärendil shone in her mirror one day, and that's the light of the Silmaril, Galadriel captured that light in her vial, and that's the star glass that she gives to Frodo. That is actually the light of the Silmaril, going all the way back to the First Age. And as he looks, Frodo sees that she has one of the 3 elvish rings, because now he's sensitive and sees the ring, right? And she knows it, right? She says, yes, she said, it is not permitted to speak of it, right? But it cannot be hidden from the ring bearer. And one who has seen the eye. Verily, it is in the land of Lorien, upon the finger of Galadriel, that one of the 3 remains. This is Nenya, the ring of adamant, and I am its keeper. Later on, we find Elrod and Gandalf have the other 2. He suspects, Sauron suspects, but he does not know, not yet. Do you not see now, wherefore your coming to us is as the footsteps of doom? For if you fail, then we are laid bare to the enemy. Yet if you succeed, then our power is diminished, and Lothlorien will fade, and the tides of time will sweep it away. We must depart into the west, or dwindle to a rustic folk of dell and cave, slowly to forget and to be forgotten. And what do you wish, Frodo says? That what should be shall be. The love of the elves for their land and their works is deeper than the deeps of the sea, and their regret is undying, and cannot ever wholly be assuaged. Yet they will cast all away rather than submit to Sauron, for they know him now. All right, in the Silmarillion, and I've already taught my students about the Silmarillion, you need to understand that the difference between elves and men is men are mortal and elves are immortal. But elves are not eternal. They live forever, but their life is tied to the earth, to Middle Earth. And they will live as long as Middle Earth lives, and they will grow and wane with it. And so they have immortality, but they're always melancholy because they can't hold on to it. The great temptation, those 3 rings tempted the elves to keep Lothlorien and Rivendell forever the same. They want to live in the past, but it makes them melancholy. It's not as clear in the Silmarillion, in the Lord of the Rings, but in the Silmarillion, it turns out that mortality was Ilúvatar, God's gift to men. It was a gift. Why is mortality a gift? Because it means we will not be forever bound to the cycles of this world. We will die and escape from the bounds and move on. But the elves will be forever trapped. And the fall of Númenor that caused so many problems was because the Númenorians forgot that mortality was a gift, and they lusted after the immortality of the elves, and they tried to go to the undying lands. And that's what caused Ilúvatar to send a giant wave to destroy Númenor. And the men, people like Boromir and Aragorn, are the remains of those noble Númenorians, the men of the West. I think that's one of the, and in one of his letters, Tolkien said, well, the real theme of the Lord of the Rings is mortality and immortality, death, right? And how it can be. And so the poor elves, they don't have any ultimate hope, right? They don't have an ultimate hope. In fact, Galadriel calls history the long defeat. And sometimes Tolkien used that phrase as well, the long defeat. Well, a little bit farther, Frodo says, you are wise and fearless and fair, Lady Galadriel. I will give you the one ring if you ask for it. It is too great a matter for me. Galadriel laughed with a sudden clear laugh. Wise the Lady Galadriel may be, yet here she has met her match in courtesy. Gently are you revenged for my testing of your heart at our first meeting. You begin to see with a keen eye. I do not deny that my heart has greatly desired to ask what you offer. For many long years I had pondered what I might do should the great ring come into my hands. And behold, it was brought within my grasp. The evil that was devised long ago works on in many ways, whether Sauron himself stands or falls. Would not that have been a noble deed to set to the credit of his ring if I had taken it by force or fear from my guest? But now, she says, it comes. You will give me the ring freely. In place of the Dark Lord, you will set up a queen, and I shall not be dark, but beautiful and terrible as the morning and the night. fair as the sea and the sun and the snow upon the mountain, dreadful as the storm and the lightning, stronger than the foundations of the earth. All shall love me and despair. Even she is tempted. She would use it for goodness and beauty, but she would become as much a tyrant as Sauron, forcing things to stay the same and never to change. She lifted up her hand, and from the ring that she wore there issued a great light that illumined her alone and left all less dark. She stood before Frodo, seeming now tall beyond measurement and beautiful beyond enduring, terrible and worshipful. This is how the ring would corrupt even Galadriel. Then she let her hand fall, and the light faded, and suddenly she laughed again. Remember how Bilbo laughed when he gives the ring away in the very first chapter. And lo, she was shrunken, a slender elf woman, clad in simple white, whose gentle voice was soft and sad. I passed the test. I will diminish and go into the west and remain Galadriel. Now you need to understand, this is in some ways the longest story arc of the Tolkien world. Galadriel was there. She was in Valinor. She lived there. And she was also there at the first kinslaying of the elves when Feanor killed the Teleri to steal their ships. And Galadriel she didn't do the killing, but she's partly responsible. She should have gone back, but she didn't. She's had a long story arc. And finally, at the very end, she has passed the test. And she will eventually go back on the ship from the Grey Havens back to the west. So it's long, but she has had to give up the power when it was offered to her. And it's wonderful because at the end of this chapter, Sam says, well, it would have been better for you to do it. And look what she says. If you had that power, you'd make some folks pay for their dirty work. You'd set things to right. But look what she says. I would. That is how it would begin. But it would not stop with that. Alas, it is altogether evil. You cannot use it, even thinking to wield it for good, for it will corrupt you. Okay, let's look at one more chapter and see the farewell and talk a little bit more about elvish magic. We've already talked a little bit about it, but here on page 369, the Lady Galadriel gives the lembas. That's the way bread. This is about as allegorical as you get in Tolkien, because the way bread very much is the Eucharist, the wafer. If you've gone to a Catholic Mass, they don't use bread like, they use a wafer. And it's very much like this lembas. Now, the lembas, of course, is the manna in the wilderness that God fed, right? But it's also the Eucharist. And only the lady is allowed to give it to non-elves. And the only time this was done before was when Melian in Doriath, this is in Silmarillion, gave it to Turin to help him. This is only the second time it was given to men, to non-elves. And it's wonderful. It is true, man. You only need one to keep a full-grown man. And later on in the book, we'll find out about lembas, that when you rely only on it for food, it actually becomes stronger and more restored. It's almost like living of the sacrament or something like that, right? And Tolkien always called the Mass the Blessed Sacrament. He took it very, very seriously. And again, there is a power. But to me, the ultimate example of the magic is the cloaks. And she explains this on page 370. They're given the cloaks, right? That will keep them. And then Pippin says, are these magic cloaks? Here we go again. I do not know what you mean by that, answered the leader of the elves. Again, what do you mean? They are fair garments, and the web is good, for it was made in this land. They are elvish robes, certainly, if that is what you mean. Leaf and branch, water and stone. They have the hue and beauty of all these things under the twilight of Lorien that we love. For we put the thought of all that we love into all that we make. Yet they are garments, not armor, and they will not turn a shaft or a blade. But they should serve you well. They are light to wear and warm enough or cool enough at need, and you will find them a great aid in keeping out of the sight of unfriendly eyes Whether you walk among the stones or the trees, you are indeed high in the favor of the lady, for she herself and the maidens wove this stuff, and never before have we clad strangers in the garb of our own people. The cloaks have been imbued with the lore of wood and stone and water. That's why it's camouflage. It's not an invisibility cloak that works by that kind of power. It is a cloak. It's just like when Frodo felt like he was inside the tree. For a moment, this brings you in sympathy, and that's why you're rendered invisible. Just beautiful stuff. Okay, as we move on, I just have to point this out to you because it's so important. Look at page 374, and this is the paragraph before the space break. The geography's land. They're going to go down the river. We learn about the river, and they mention Fangorn Forest. And Boromir says, I've heard about Fangorn Forest, but that's just one of those old wives' tales. And I want you to see what Celeborn, the husband of Galadriel, says. He says, then I need say no more, but do not despise the lore that has come down from distant years. For oft it may chance that old wives keep in memory word of things that once were needful for the wise to know. Don't make fun of those old wives' tales and traditions, because sometimes they carry down a deep truth. Well, then she gives out all the gifts. She gives out a beautiful sheath for Andúril, and on it she has engraved the history, the lineage of the sword. See, this doesn't happen in Greek and Roman mythology. You don't have names for inanimate objects and swords. But in Norse mythology and the King Arthur stories, like the most famous sword, it's called Excalibur, right? There's always objects are just more important in Norse mythology, and things like Beowulf as well. Okay, then one by one we're given the story, and she gives the elf stone, Elisar, the elf stone, to Aragorn, and gives him the new name of Elisar, the hope. And here, see, the movie, it's there, but it's not clear. A lot of people don't realize, okay? Galadriel had a daughter named Celebrian, and Celebrian married Elrod and gave birth to Arwen. So a lot of people don't understand Galadriel is Arwen's grandmother, okay? And Galadriel is Elrond's mother-in-law, but she's a good mother-in-law. But what happened here is Celebrian was captured by orcs, and the ordeal was so horrible and PTSD to her that she left Middle-earth and went back to the Blessed Isles. And that's why we never meet Elrond's wife. But again, a lot of people just don't realize that Arwen is the granddaughter of Galadriel. Right? Okay, then beautiful, more elf magic. She gives a little box to Sam that has a G on it. That can mean Galadriel, but it can also mean garden. And in it is some, not magic stuff, it's dirt from her land that has in it all the life-giving properties of growth. And if you go back to your home and you find it in ruins, sprinkle this everywhere, and it will be like Lorien. By the way, that's left out of the movie because we leave out the scouring of the Shire, so he doesn't need the box. The box we see is the one that has the salt in it. But anyway, this is more magic, a deep magic of the earth. Then, another beautiful place. And what would you have, Gimli, son of Gloin? Nothing. There's nothing I ask but my memory of the lady. Ah, what courtesy, she says. Is there nothing? Well, there's one thing. I would like a single strand of your golden hair. And everybody's amazed. And she says, you've outdone me in courtesy. But what would you do with it? I would put it inside of a crystal vial and cherish it as a pledge between the mountain and the wood. In other words, the dwarves and the elves. And she gives 3. As Gimli says in the movie, I asked for 1 strand of her golden hair. She gave me 3. Again, the beauty. And you need to know a backstory that's not even in the Silmarillion. You have to read all the other books. One time, Feanor asked Galadriel for her hair, and she refused. And that seems to be the reason why he went and got the light from the tree and made the Silmarils. So now, everything's sort of come full circle here. And then she gives the star glass to Frodo. May it be a light to you in dark places when all other lights go out. That's on page 376. And she tells him, this is the light of the Eärendil, the light of the star. All that remains of that light, and that's all that remains of the light of the two trees. That Galadriel is one of the few people that saw that. That's actually in this book. Wow. And then we'll end here on page 378, and I'll leave the last two chapters because it's getting really long here. We'll just end with this beautiful dialogue between Gimli and Legolas. And he says, I have looked the last upon that which was fairest. Henceforward I will call nothing fair unless it be her gift. He put his hand to his breast. Tell me, Legolas, why did I come on this quest? Little did I know where the chief peril lay. Truly Elrod spoke, saying that we could not foresee what we might meet upon our road. Torment in the dark was the danger that I feared, and it did not hold me back. But I would not have come had I known the danger of light and joy. Now I have taken my worst wound in this parting, even if I were to go this night straight to the Dark Lord. Alas for Gimli, son of Gloin. This is what draws people to the Renaissance Festival every year. There's a sort of magic and beauty that lingers, and we feel it almost like a presence. It's almost dangerous because the joy is so rich. Nay, said Legolas, alas for us all, and for all that walk the world in these after days, for such is the way of it, to find and lose as it seems to those whose boat is on the running stream. But I count you blessed, Gimli, son of Gloin, for your loss you suffer of your own free will, and you might have chosen otherwise. But you have not forsaken your companions, and the least reward that you shall have is that the memory of Lothlorien shall remain ever clear and unstained in your heart, and shall neither fade nor grow stale. And then I actually lied. Turn to the next chapter, because there is one more dialogue between elf and dwarf. That's a good place to end. And that is on page 388. I just want to round this off, and then we'll stop here. Okay, he says, they're talking about Lothlorien, and he says, but perhaps the way of it, said Frodo, in that land, I'm sorry, this is not, this is Frodo talking, but they're picking up what we just heard Gimli and Legolas say. Frodo says, in that land, maybe, we were in a time that is elsewhere long gone by. It was not, I think, until Silverlode bore us back to Anduin that we returned to the time that flows through mortal lands to the great sea. And I don't remember any moon, either new or old. And then Legolas, because Legolas stirred in his boat, and he says, nay, time does not tarry ever, he said, but change and growth is not in all things and places alike. For the elves, the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow. Swift, because they themselves change little, and all else fleets by. It is a grief to them. Slow, because they do not count the running years, not for themselves. The passing seasons are but ripples ever repeated in the long, long stream. Yet beneath the sun, all things must wear to an end at last. But the wearing is slow in Lorien. The power of the lady is on it. Rich are the hours, though short they seem, in Caras Galavon, where Galadriel wields the elven ring. That should not have been said. Okay. Shh, quiet, okay? Shouldn't have said that. But again, I want to end with this idea that in Lorien and also Rivendell, the wearing is slow. But again, it will eventually run out. They can't stop it. And that's why they're melancholy. Again, this odd idea that mortality is a gift to men. But we will not forever pine, but we will escape the circles of this world to move on to something greater. Wow. Thank you for listening. Enjoy, and let's all stay warm.